Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second ever episode of Genre Genesis with Alex Spry. This is a show all about the making of all genres. That would be like rock and roll, like we talked about this week. And I sort of said that, we're kind of leaning into something more funky and more dancey. And that was disco. So today we're going to be talking about the conception of disco as a genre and sort of as a movement. So yeah. This show is all about genres and how that's sort of created. So I'm going to be talking about the history of the genre disco. Very exciting. So usually when a lot of people think about disco today, they picture flashy outfits, disco balls, and some pretty questionable dance moves. For years, disco was often dismissed as cheesy pop music, and especially when compared to rock bands like Queen, the Rolling Stones, or Pink Floyd, which is kind of funny and ironic considering all those bands have disco-influenced songs. But the reputation ignores something very important. Disco wasn't just a musical trend of the 70s. It was a cultural movement that shaped nightlife, dance culture, and modern electronic music. And despite the criticism it faced, disco laid the groundwork for a huge amount of music we hear today, especially with Harry Styles' new album, Kiss All the Time, Disco Occasionally, which is completely disco-related music. So the question is, what exactly is disco? Disco is both a genre of dance music and a social subculture. It emerged in the late 1960s and the early 1970s from urban nightlife scenes in the United States, particularly in cities in New York and Philadelphia. The communities that helped create disco were incredibly diverse, with early disco scenes were especially popular within the African American, Latino, Italian American, and the LGBTQ plus communities, where dance clubs became important social spaces for these communities. Musically, disco is defined by a few key elements. Most disco songs use a 4-on-the-floor rhythm, meaning a bass drum hits every beat in a steady 4x4 pattern, 4/4 time pattern, designed to keep people dancing. You are constantly moving. There's no point where you are stopping your movement at all. And it's easy to dance to. It's not like a waltz dance where you're expected to dance in a certain way. With 4/4, you can just dance however you want. The sound often includes syncopated bass lines, orchestral string sections, brass and horns, electric pianos, synthesizers, and rhythmic electric guitar parts. But what's very, very prominent about the sound of disco is the bass lines. Unlike rock music, which focused on live bands and guitar solos, disco focused on groove, rhythm, and the dance floor. And the difference is very important. Disco actually grew as a reaction to the dominance of rock music during the late 1960s. At the time, dance music had started to lose cultural respectability, and rock concerts were becoming more about watching performers than participating. Disco flipped that idea completely. The dance floor became the main attraction. But disco wasn't invented by a single musician. Instead, it grew out of underground dance clubs. In the early 1970s, DJs began hosting dance parties in cities like New York, where records, not live bands, controlled the energy of the room. One of the most influential early figures of the scene was David Mancuso. Mancuso hosted legendary dance parties in New York in a venue known as The Loft, where he focused on high-quality sound systems as carefully selected records designed to keep people dancing for hours. Another pioneer was a DJ named Francis Grasso. Grasso helped develop the technique known as beat matching, blending two records together so their rhythm lined up perfectly. This also allowed DJs to create continuous mixes, meaning the music never had to stop and you could keep dancing. That technique became one of the defining features of disco culture and eventually influenced modern DJing across all genres. While DJs were shaping the club experience in New York, producers in Philadelphia were developing a new musical style known as the Philadelphia Sound. Songwriters and producers Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff helped create lush soul records that featured orchestral arrangements, smooth rhythms, and powerful vocal performances. The orchestral arrangements would be a huge staple within disco music. Their productions bridged the gap between soul music and what would eventually become disco. At the time, funk music was also playing a major role in shaping the genre. Artists like James Brown emphasized powerful bass lines, tight drum grooves, and rhythmic intensity. The groove-centered approach became a key foundation of disco's sound. As the genre developed further in the mid-1970s, producers also began experimenting with electronic sounds. One of the most influential early disco recordings was Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summers, which is a 16-minute atmospheric dance number, which is just so important to what disco would become later on. The use of synthesizers and electronic productions techniques pushed disco towards a more futuristic sound that reflected the era's fascination with technology and space exploration. But the space exploration was not just with disco, it was also reaching the rock group as well. Like it was reaching, especially, it's really, really prominent within Boston's debut album with the spaceships and with Paul McCartney and Wings' album Venus and Mars. Very futuristic sounding, of course. By the mid-1970s, disco culture was exploding. Major cities across the United States developed thriving nightclub scenes where DJs played dance records late into the night. One of the most famous venues was Studio 54 in Manhattan, which became known for its extravagant parties and celebrity guests. Disco fashion became just as iconic as the music. Clubgoers often wore platform shoes, shimmering fabrics, flashy outfits, and flowing clothes designed for dancing. The scene was closely connected to the sexual revolution of the era, where nightlife became a space for freedom, expression, and experimentation. Disco reached its commercial peak in 1977 with the release of the film Saturday Night Fever, starring John Travolta, and the movie's soundtrack, featuring songs from the infamous 1970s disco group, the Bee Gees, became one of the best-selling albums of all time, and it helped push disco firmly into mainstream pop culture. Suddenly, disco was everywhere. It was in film, it was in radio, it was in televisions, and it was in the charts. It was within everybody's wardrobe as well, obviously. And it became such a staple within the 1970s. Every time you think of the 1970s, you think of the platform shoes, you think of the fashion, you think of the movies like Saturday Night Fever, you think of everything that it's done to push the narrative almost. But with that success came backlash. By the late 1970s, some critics and rock fans began pushing back against disco's popularity. In 1979, this backlash exploded during the infamous event known as Disco Demolition Night in Chicago, where thousands of disco records were destroyed during a baseball game promotion. That was the final nail in the coffin for disco. While some people saw it as a frustration with disco's commercial saturation, others pointed out that the backlash also reflected deep cultural tensions surrounding the communities that helped originally build the genre. Despite the backlash, disco never truly disappeared. Its influence became the foundation for house music and EDM and early hip-hop DJ culture. You still hear it today, especially with groups like Daft Punk. By the early 1980s, however, disco's dominance in mainstream pop was fading. Radio had become saturated with disco records, and audiences were beginning to look for something new. The glamorous orchestras and lush arrangements of disco started to disappear, but the technology disco embraced, like synthesizers, drum machines, and electronic productions, that did not go away. Instead, a new generation of artists began using those tools in a different way. This kept disco's danceable pulse, but stripped away the guitar and the glitter. They mixed electronic sounds with punk energy. They traded orchestras for synthesizers, and they created a cooler, sharper, futuristic sound that would define the next decade. That sound would soon be known as New Wave. So now that you kind of have a brief understanding, not a brief, but a pretty good understanding of what disco is, I wanted to show you and tell you my favorite songs that are disco. One of my favorite songs from disco is Voulez-Vous by ABBA. They are, in my opinion, probably one of the biggest sort of disco-y sounding groups of the 1970s. It's definitely not the most popular, like the Bee Gees are, but they definitely are up there. Voulez-Vou's absolutely pulsating, the beat that's within that is just so iconic, and you can't help but dance to it. You can't help but feel like you are in a good mood when you hear Voulez-Vous. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough by Michael Jackson off of his Off the Wall album. Although this song was written and, well, it was mostly released in 1979, right at the tail end of when disco was, you can't help but feel like this is like the heart of what disco is. It is so fun. There is so much happening. The bass line within it is just absolutely stunning and absolutely mind-blowing, the way that they go up and down that fretboard. Lover's Theme or Love's Theme by Barry White, which is just, it is completely instrumental. There are 0 lyrics within it. It is just all orchestral, but also so groovy at the same time. Adding that orchestra along with the guitars and the bass is just so groundbreaking, and it is just nothing but dance. It is just so dancey. You can't help but dance to it. That's all that disco is, and that's how you should feel when you listen to music. Play That Funky Music, White Boy. That's not Play That Funky Music by Wild Cherry. I don't know how much I would consider it. I guess it technically is disco, but you can't help but dance to it. I'm going to be saying that for the entire thing, but the bass line that just defines that noise, like when you hear that song, it's so fun to listen to. You can't help but dance to it. And then finally, Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. I can't help but put that. It's not my favorite Bee Gees song or disco song from that era, but I couldn't help but include it, mainly because it is so disco. Like hearing those like specific pedaled guitars is just, it's so iconic, hearing that intro and that drum beat hitting every single beat of the 4/4 time signature. And what's also awesome, I feel like this is common knowledge, but I can't help but kind of say it, is that when you're performing CPR, you do it to this song. People always say, if you want to keep in time for doing CPR, you just sing Staying Alive in your head by the Bee Gees. And it's just very interesting to note that you need disco to stay alive in a way. You're staying alive with disco, bro. Disco will never die. People have always said like disco's gonna die, it's not coming back. Bro, it has been back. It has literally been back. Like Harry Styles is using it within his new album, which is just all dance. Madonna has used it within her records. It's all dance. It's all EDM. Daft Punk has shown that you can win a Grammy within this time frame with disco. So disco is very important, and that's kind of it. The next episode, I'm going to be talking about new wave, my favorite genre of all time. But for now, I'm Alex Spry. This has been Genre Genesis. Thank you for watching.